So you've got a GH4 and you're trying to get the most out of it. It's still a great camera. Even by today's standards, it may lack some of the bells and whistles, but when you look at image quality and its current use price, it has to be one of the best bang for the buck cameras still in 2021. There's only one huge problem. The low light footage sucks. I've been working with Panasonic video cameras for 15 years. Ever since I got a DVX100B back in 2006, all the way now to these GH5s, a lot has changed, but one thing has stayed the same. The out-of-the-box settings, they're just not as good as they can be. I started tweaking the DVX100B a little bit. Then when I got the HPX170, I really dug in deep, spent a lot of time tweaking the settings, and I was able to get results that were, in my opinion, far better than what you get if you just turn it on and use one of the presets. In addition to that camera that I owned for a long time, I've also rented the DVX200, tweaked that up real good, and I currently own a UX180 as well. All of these cameras have really needed some focused effort to get the best quality out of them. Now, all of those cameras I referenced were camcorder style, and you would think maybe there would be a difference between how Panasonic conducts themselves with those and with their mirrorless offerings. But unfortunately, it's more of the same. The settings that it comes with are just okay, and there's a lot of room to improve. Now, why on earth the entire research and development team at Panasonic can't figure out the optimal settings for their own cameras, and me, just a guy in his room and then testing out the garage door, why I can come across better settings than them when they are likely engineers and I'm just an average working videographer, that makes no sense. I realize that seems absurd. And if it wasn't for 15 years of doing just that, I wouldn't believe it myself. Much like my past, when I used to do a bunch of tests and work and figure out what was best, both for me and probably just in general, I did that just times 10 for the GH4. The whole thing was a friend of mine sold me his when he was shooting weddings, and he just found it completely unusable in anything other than, generally speaking, sunlight. You know, by ISO 800, it was on the edge of being usable. 400, you could still see the noise, usually in the mids. And if you weren't shooting at ISO 200, you were starting to suffer for it. That just didn't seem possible to me. So I took him up on it. I bought it for a good price and just figured, hey, if nothing else, now I have a 4K camera, and that's cool. I can work with that, you know, in controlled environments or whatnot. But I was pretty confident that I could figure something out. And I did. I went online. I took all of these different people's ideas. You know, there's a million different people who have, oh, these settings for me, this for that, shoot with this setting and then use this LUT, but overexposed by 3/4 of a stop. So I got all of these people who had done their time. In some cases, they may have been selling their results. Some people who didn't, but they were very popular online. And I figured, hey, one of these has to work. And kinda. I took about 10 different setting profiles and just put them together in like a bracket format. And when I got down to the 2 last profiles, there still wasn't really a clear winner. So I took those 2, did the homework, figured out what did what, and then started combining the 2 and tweaking them until I landed on what I have today. Which, as far as I've ever seen, no one has presented as a finished, this is my favorite settings. So, hopefully, this will be a big help for your GH4 and probably your GH5 as well. Admittedly, when I got my GH5s, I didn't do the same amount of intense work. I just put my GH4 settings on the GH5 to see how it worked out, and it looked great. It matched very well with my GH4, and I had no complaints. Already, I could see that my ISO settings on my GH5 were going higher than most people claim to be comfortable with on them. So I considered it must not be too bad. Once again, if I start squeezing stuff out of that, and then it starts looking different than the GH4, right now I can color match the two relatively easy. I usually just shoot with two GH5s, but since we're focused so much on the GH4 today, I threw in a third one, the GH4, so you can get an idea of the image quality with my settings, also compared to the GH5s that I run. So just brought my GoPro so you can see a little bit of what's going on. Here you go, the two GH5s, and then the GH4 way back there with the nice Sigma 50-100. Both of them at the ISO 1250, which is what I personally find to be the cutoff for the GH4. You can push it to 1600 if you need to, but I rather not. On that same topic, the GH5s, I find that 2500 is my cutoff if I can. 3200 in a pinch, and 4000 is where it really just starts to go down the toilet. So that's what my numbers are. Of course, people's opinions will vary, but at least we're shooting at 1250 here, so you can get an idea of what that maximum ISO looks like on the GH4, or maximum in my opinion, because that's what we're here for mostly. The profile is great all around daylight, like I'm shooting in now, window light. It's not just for low light. I've seen some people with maybe Sony's that are like, oh, you use this setting for daytime and then you switch it to this for night because, one's good for this but not for that. This profile for me is great all around. I've used it outside in broad daylight. I've used it where it's so dark I can barely see my feet. So it's just an all-around great profile for the GH4 and the GH5. But just my focus when I was making it was on low light. The big thing with the GH4 originally was that the noise wouldn't hide in the dark shadow areas, but were actually more in the mids. Something like this, when I got that GH4, was terribly noisy. Really started to show, like I said, maybe at 400 even. And then by 800, this thing was going. Anything more than that was ridiculous. So that was a big change in my settings as well. When I got it, they were in the mids, and I was able to push that noise, get rid of some of it, but the rest push it down into the darker tones, which should mean that my shirt is a little bit sketchy, but it might not be. It definitely won't be with the GH5s, I wouldn't think. We could be pushing it with the 4, but we'll see. I also think that the 4 might be ever so slightly underexposed right now because, as the sun changes, so do the settings here. So I am going to go tweak that right now because it's not fair if I'm switching back and forth and I've changed the exposure and the noise looks worse than it needs to. So, all right, so I went and ratcheted up the light on the GH4. Hopefully now that's more of a fair thing in case I had to change the exposure in post. That should brighten things up, and whatever you see with the black shirt should be what you get when it comes to what is, in my opinion, the max ISO. And then you can also see here a gray and a white card just to see if there's any noise creeping around in the gray or in the white. I'll probably shoot these up close so you can get a better idea as well. All right, and now we're shooting the gray and the white card. This is once again at the GH4's my personal limit of 1250. You can see where the noise is hiding, whether you're seeing it in the mids like a lot of the default profiles tend to do, or if it's in the black in my Canon lens, or if still at 1250, it's not bad anywhere. Now that I've rambled on and you have an idea of the who, what, where, when, and why of how I got here, we'll get to what you came here for anyway, which are the settings. All right, so we'll start with the foundation of the settings that I use, which would be the photo style, or what I would just call the color profile. It's based off of a Cinelike D profile, but then I've used contrast at +1, sharpness at -3. Now with the sharpness, I've got it on -3, but if you wanted to bump it down to -5, like a lot of people seem to like, that's totally fine. I would imagine that would only improve your results. I don't do it just because I'm not trying to add sharpness in post, And my poor computer here, as lovely as it looks, is getting up there, and it struggles to run the paid version of DaVinci, which is where I would have to add my sharpness. So without that easily obtainable, it's not something I'm trying to do. Noise reduction is at -3, kind of a middle setting. Once again, I'm not saying that these are perfect. I'm saying these are perfect for me, for my uses. So when it comes to settings like that, play around, see what's best for you. All right, next up is saturation. I keep it at 0. Once again, I know there's a lot of opinions on that. I try to keep it a nice middle ground. It doesn't make any of the colors so bright that it becomes awkward if you're trying to adjust in post, but it's not so flat that the picture just looks so washed out that you couldn't potentially deliver it right out of the card if needed. Finally, we have the hue. I've left that alone. Over the years, I've messed with it a little bit, going back and forth, but ultimately it just didn't seem like it was necessary. So that can't be it, right? It's not that simple. And it's not. There's a few more settings that seem to make a pretty big difference. First up, in the little motion picture menu, is the highlight shadow. Now I already had +1 contrast in the color profile, and really after this, these settings seem very bizarre. Really, I'll admit, some of the things that I'm going through here seem to counteract each other or double up on top of each other. And it's like, why wouldn't you just forget all that? Why wouldn't you just run none of these settings I'm about to show and maybe take the contrast down in the color profile, and then you'd have generally the same result, but it's gotta be better, right? It's gotta be better than making the camera do all these weird twist and turn processes, but it's not. I've actually tried a couple of different variations of removing some of these settings I'm about to show you, and it's actually been that the dynamic range has suffered. Once again, I know it makes no logical sense, but it also does not make any logical sense that Panasonic ships cameras for the past 15 years, if not more, with sub-ideal settings. Anyway, so we go to the highlight and shadow, and you put it on the +2, -2 setting. And then what might be the most controversial setting that I use is that I have the master pedestal at +4. Now I know if you go to any forums about the GH4 or the GH5, they will tell you under no circumstances should you mess with the master pedestal, or at least most people will. But I do not agree. I've got the luminance level from 0 to 255. The rest of the menu, pretty sure it's nothing special. And then, yeah, the rest of the stuff is nothing too consequential. So bottom line, you throw it on highlight and shadow with the +2, -2. You got the master pedestal at +4, luminance at 0 to 255. And then you've got the Cinelec D setting right here with the profiles I ran down. So luckily, it'll only take you probably 30 seconds to configure your camera like this, and then you can go do your own tests, right? If you've got your own settings that you've made. If you don't, and you've just been using stock settings, you can go out and compare them yourself and see if what I've found to be great for me is also for you. So there you have it. I really hope it helps. If it does work out, if you do watch this and it's been beneficial, or maybe you put it in your camera and you find that there's a setting or two that you've tweaked that's better, leave a comment. Let me know. I'd love, hey, I don't think I know it all. I feel like I know a lot, but by no means do I think that I know it all. So if you find some improvement, please do let me know. And for the GH5, there's really not much difference. There may be different locations and different menus to find these, but the settings themselves, I use the same thing in my GH5. Once again, over the years, it's changed. I've tweaked things here and there. I've really landed on this and it seems great. In post, there's still a lot of flexibility. If I absolutely positively had to deliver this footage as a final product without color grading, it's acceptable, which of course is subjective, but it's not so flat that if somebody else sees it, they're going to say what's wrong with the footage, or that it's completely unusable right out of the card. And I think that's great to have that flexibility. You can really tweak it, or you cannot tweak it at all. Of course, now that I'm used to looking at it with my 2 different LUTs and my adjustments that I do on my footage, of course now right out of the camera does not look appealing to me. But before I was doing that, I was delivering things, as much as it's embarrassing to say maybe, I was delivering a lot of things with only maybe making exposure changes in post. So nobody complained about it. You know, now I can see the difference, but you know, depending on what line of work you do and what level you're at, this might be totally acceptable right out of the card. So yeah, hopefully this GH4 is still in focus across the room. If it is, then I appreciate you watching. I hope it's been helpful. Once again, leave a comment if it's been beneficial or if you found something that you think improves upon this. Please do like and subscribe. I'll have more content coming out about camera stuff pretty soon. Thanks.